I thought it was just an accident. Until it kept happening. Same time. Same neighbor. Same smug smile. That's when I realized this HOA Karen wasn't stopping. So I stopped playing nice. It all started on a calm, sunny morning in our quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where people wave at each other from their driveways. Children ride their bikes along the sidewalks. And the mailman knows almost everyone by name. I had just moved in a few months prior, full of excitement and hope for a peaceful life. My house wasn't huge, but it was perfect for me. The lawn was neat, the exterior freshly painted, and the mailbox at the edge of my driveway stood proudly, ready to receive letters, packages, and the occasional coupon flyer. I had no idea that this simple mailbox would become the center of an unexpected and, frankly, ridiculous war with one of my neighbors, who everyone in the area secretly referred to as HOA Karen. At first, it was subtle. I would walk outside on a Monday morning, ready to grab the mail, and notice something slightly off. The mailbox seemed a bit tilted, leaning to one side just a fraction of an inch. I thought maybe the previous day's strong wind had done it, or perhaps the mail truck had accidentally nudged it while driving too close. But as the week went on, these accidents started to become a pattern. The mailbox would be knocked over, dented, or scratched, and the timing always seemed a little too suspicious. It was never random. It happened almost every time HOA Karen's car was seen driving down the street, usually on her way to a meeting or while running errands, her signature scowl firmly in place behind the wheel. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it really was an accident. Right. After all, she did live on the corner, and the mailbox sat just at the edge of my property line. But accidents don't usually happen 3 or 4 times in a single week, and especially not with the exact same mailbox every time. That was when I started paying closer attention. I noticed how her car seemed to drift a little too close whenever she passed my driveway, almost brushing the mailbox like it was some kind of obstacle in a video game she had to dodge. I would see her glance at it with a smirk, or worse, an expression that suggested satisfaction when she realized she had hit it again. Neighbors began noticing, too. Mr. Thompson from across the street, a retired Army veteran with a soft spot for justice, mentioned he had seen HOA Karen's SUV inch a little too close to my mailbox on multiple occasions. You retelling me it's just coincidence that it gets knocked over every time she drives by? He asked, shaking his head. It was hard to argue with that. Even the kids on the street started making jokes about it, calling it the haunted mailbox, or Karen's target practice. I laughed along with them at first, thinking it was harmless neighborhood banter. But deep down, the frustration was growing. The first time it really got to me was when I found the mailbox completely smashed one morning. I had left it upright, perfectly aligned the night before, and the next day it was bent in half, the metal twisted and the flag hanging uselessly. My initial reaction was shock. Who would do something like this? I stared at the wreckage, trying to piece together whether it was an accident or something more deliberate. That's when I noticed tire marks on the grass right next to it, leading straight toward HOA Karen's driveway. My stomach sank. It was starting to feel personal, targeted, and there was no denying it anymore. This was intentional. I decided to confront the situation cautiously. I walked over to HOA Karen's house one afternoon, trying to keep my tone calm and friendly. Hi. I just wanted to check, did you happen to notice anything about my mailbox? It's been getting knocked over a lot recently. She looked at me with that same cold stare, barely acknowledging my presence, and muttered something about maybe the wind, or kids playing around. I tried to press a little, but it was like talking to a brick wall. She had that uncanny ability to make you feel ridiculous for even bringing it up. The conversation ended there, but I knew nothing was going to change unless I did something about it myself. From that point on, I became hyper-aware of the mailbox. I checked it every morning and evening, inspecting for scratches, dents, or any sign that it might be tampered with. I even started keeping a small camera nearby to catch any suspicious activity. The mailbox, once just a mundane part of the property, had become the front line of my personal battlefield with HOA Karen. Every day was a mix of anxiety and vigilance. I would hear her car approaching and my heart rate would spike. Would she knock it over again today? Would I have to replace it again? Another dent. Another inconvenience. The thought of constantly repairing it was exhausting. And yet, oddly, it fueled a small spark of determination in me. It wasn't just about the mailbox anymore. It was about standing up for myself. About reclaiming a sense of control in a neighborhood where HOA Karen seemed to thrive on petty dominance. Each dent, each scratch, each knocked-over post became a symbol of the absurd power struggle I had unwillingly been dragged into. The other neighbors whispered quietly, offering sympathy or advice, but it was clear that they, too, were wary of crossing HOA Karen. She had a reputation for escalating minor disputes into full-blown HOA complaints or threats, and no one wanted to be the next target. By the time I reached the end of that first month, the mailbox had been attacked more times than I could count. I had repaired it, straightened it, and even tried temporary reinforcements, but nothing seemed to stop the ongoing chaos. And yet, despite the frustration, a sense of determination was growing stronger with every incident. I realized that if I wanted peace or at least some semblance of justice, I was going to need a plan. This wasn't going to end with simple repairs or polite conversations. No, this required thinking ahead, a little creativity, and a way to finally turn the tables on HOA Karen without causing an all-out neighborhood feud. Little did I know that simple, unassuming mailbox at the edge of my driveway would become the centerpiece of a clever plan I was about to put into motion. The beginning of Mailbox Mayhem was just the first chapter, but it was setting the stage for a story that no one in the neighborhood, including HOA Karen herself, would ever forget. And as I stared at the bent, twisted metal one last time, a smile crept across my face. It was time to get creative. It was time for HOA Karen to meet a mailbox she definitely didn't see coming. After the first few mailbox attacks, what started as mild irritation quickly escalated into full-blown frustration. At first, I tried to chalk it up to coincidence, but the sheer frequency of the incidents left no room for doubt. Every mornings, I would step outside with a sense of cautious anticipation, half expecting to find the mailbox twisted, dented, or lying flat on the ground once again. The first time it happened, I had been shocked. By the fifth or sixth time, I was genuinely angry. Each incident was like a personal message, a reminder that HOA Karen seemed to have made it her mission to harass me over something as trivial as a mailbox. It wasn't just the physical damage that bothered me, it was the audacity behind it. She clearly knew exactly what she was doing, and the fact that she could get away with it without anyone calling her out made the situation even more infuriating. The community was tight-knit enough that everyone noticed her antics, but no one wanted to confront her directly. People whispered behind closed doors, exchanged knowing glances, and sometimes shook their heads in disbelief. But when it came to facing her head-on, the courage always evaporated. I couldn't blame them. HOA Karen had a reputation for turning minor complaints into major conflicts, using her position in the homeowners association to intimidate anyone who dared challenge her. But I also knew that if I didn't find a way to deal with her, the mailbox attacks wouldn't stop. With every new dent, scratch, or fallen post, my frustration grew exponentially. It started to affect my daily routine. I would check the mailbox multiple times a day, not out of necessity, but out of worries. My mornings were no longer peaceful. Instead of enjoying my coffee on the porch, I found myself scanning the street, watching for her SUV or any suspicious movement. I began to dread her presence. The sound of her engine, the sight of her car slowly approaching. The mailbox had become a symbol of control, or rather, a lack of control, and it drove me to consider solutions I never would have imagined before. Neighbors began to notice the pattern, and their reactions varied. Some found it hilarious, joking about HOA Karen's personal vendetta against my mailbox. Others were sympathetic, offering words of encouragement or advice on how to fortify the post. Mr. Thompson, my retired neighbor, was particularly vocal. He would shake his head in disbelief every time I showed him the damage, muttering things like, "Some people just need to learn their lesson." Even the kids started to playfully name the mailbox, turning it into a neighborhood joke. While their humor helped lighten the mood, it also highlighted how ridiculous the situation had become. I wasn't just dealing with mailbox damage anymore. I was living in a microcosm of escalating tension, where a simple object had become the center of a silent, ongoing wars. The repeated attacks forced me to take matters into my own hands. I began experimenting with temporary fixes, trying to reinforce the mailbox in ways that might withstand her repeated visits. I added extra screws, reinforced the base with concrete, and even tried installing protective barriers. Each time, it seemed like a small victory, only to be followed by another attack that left me staring at a twisted metal post with mounting exasperation. The pattern was infuriating. It wasn't enough to just repair the mailbox. I needed a solution that would deter her entirely or, at the very least, make her realize that her actions were futile. As the weeks went by, my frustration began to take a mental toll. I started to notice the tension creeping into other parts of my life. I would recount the incidents at work, unable to focus properly during meetings because my mind kept drifting back to the mailbox. Sleep became difficult, knowing that when I woke up, I might face another destroyed post. The constant stress of anticipating her next move was exhausting. And yet, strangely, it also fueled a sense of determination. I realized that the mailbox had become more than just a piece of metal. It was a challenge, a puzzle I needed to solve, and a way to reclaim my peace of mind. The escalation of events also forced me to think creatively. I started to take mental notes of HOA Karen's habits, her driving patterns, and the times when she was most likely to pass by my house. I paid attention to how her car maneuvered, how close it came to the mailbox, and even the expressions on her face when she thought no one was watching. Every detail mattered because I was planning a strategy, one that would ultimately shift the power dynamic in my favor. What had started as simple frustration began to evolve into a carefully calculated plan. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. There were moments when the absurdity of the situation hit me. I would laugh out loud at the thought of an entire adult conflict revolving around a mailbox. It was ridiculous, almost cartoonish, yet undeniably real. This mix of humor and irritation created a strange emotional cocktail, anger tempered with amusement. I realized that part of the frustration was rooted in the sheer pettiness of it all. Who goes to such lengths over a mailbox? And yet, here we were, locked in this silent struggle that consumed more energy and attention than I ever imagined possible. The repeated attacks also highlighted something about HOA Karen's personality. She thrived on control and intimidation. Each incident wasn't just about knocking over a mailbox. It was about asserting dominance, about sending a message that she could get away with whatever she wanted. Understanding this gave me insight into how to approach the problem. Direct confrontation hadn't worked. Temporary repairs were insufficient, and reporting her to the HOA would likely escalate things further. What I needed was a plan that combined strategy, creativity, and a touch of irony, something that would give me the upper hand without crossing the line into petty retaliation. By the time the mailbox had been attacked for the 10th time, my frustration had reached its peak. But so had my resolve. I knew that continuing to react in the same way would only lead to a cycle of damage and repair, a never-ending loop of irritation. It was time to think ahead, to design a solution that would not only protect the mailbox, but also serve as a clever way to finally turn the tables. The repeated attacks had forced me into this position. They had tested my patience, my creativity, and my ability to navigate the quirks of neighborhood dynamics. And in a strange way, they had also prepared me for the moment when HOA Karen would finally see that I wasn't someone to be trifled with. The mailbox was no longer just a post at the end of my driveway. It had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to perseverance, and a silent reminder that even the smallest acts of frustration could lead to creative problem solving. The repeated attacks and rising frustration were the catalyst for the next phase of my plan, the phase where I would finally install a mailbox that HOA Karen definitely didn't see coming. One that would end the cycle of damage and turn the story in my favor. After weeks of frustration, countless repairs, and constant vigilance, I realized that the time had come to stop simply reacting. The mailbox was no longer just an object of annoyance. It had become the center of an ongoing power struggle. And if I wanted peace or at least a little justice, I would need to take matters into my own hands. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about clever strategy, planning, and turning the situation in my favor in a way that HOA Karen couldn't anticipate. I needed a plan that was as creative as it was effective. One that would solve the problem once and for all while teaching a subtle lesson about boundaries and respect. The first step in my plan was observation. I spent hours watching HOA Karen's routines, noting the times she drove by my house, the routes she took, and even the speed at which she approached the mailbox. I started documenting patterns, taking mental notes on when she was most likely to be out and about. Early mornings, midday errands, late afternoon trips. Each piece of information was crucial, and I realized that knowing her habits would give me a huge advantage when it came time to implement my plan. It was like preparing for a tactical operation, except my objective was a mailbox and a lesson in civility. Next came the research phase. I looked into different types of mailboxes, trying to find one that was sturdy enough to withstand accidental or deliberate impacts, but also unique enough to send a clear message. I wanted something that would be difficult to knock over, but also clever in design. Something that would catch HOA Karen completely off guard. I read reviews, compared materials, and even sketched out potential designs in a notebook. I considered everything from reinforced steel to heavy-duty composite materials, weighing the pros and cons of each. It had to be strong, durable, and, most importantly, visually striking. The creative side of my mind started to take over. I imagined a mailbox that was not just functional but playful, a mailbox that made a statement. Maybe it would be taller than the standard ones, with bright colors or unusual shapes that stood out from the uniform rows of plain posts in the neighborhood. Perhaps it would have clever angles or hidden reinforcements that made it nearly impossible to damage. I even considered subtle but humorous additions, like decorative elements that hinted at HOA Karen's repeated failures. The goal was clear. This mailbox would be a surprise, a solution that combined practicality with a touch of wit. While I planned, I also considered the psychological aspect. HOA Karen had always thrived on control and intimidation, and her satisfaction seemed tied to seeing me react to her actions. If I could install a mailbox that not only resisted her attacks, but also eliminated the drama entirely, it would disrupt her sense of power. I imagined the look on her face when she passed by and realized that her usual tactics no longer worked. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about reclaiming control in a clever and dignified way. I wanted the mailbox to do the talking, to silently communicate that I was no longer a passive participant in her little neighborhood games. I also took practical considerations into account. The installation needed to be secure and permanent, yet not so extreme that it would attract complaints from the HOA or violate local regulations. I researched codes and restrictions, ensuring that the new mailbox would be fully compliant while still offering maximum protection. I considered the height, distance from the curb, and anchoring methods, making sure that every detail was meticulously planned. I realized that a successful installation wasn't just about the mailbox itself, but also about creating a setup that minimized any possibility of future conflict. As the plan took shape, I began sourcing materials. I visited hardware stores, online retailers, and even specialty shops to find the perfect components. Heavy-duty posts, reinforced brackets, weatherproof paint, and decorative accents, all of it needed to come together seamlessly. I wanted the mailbox to be both practical and visually impactful. The process of gathering materials became part of the strategy itself, a way to ensure that the final product would be exactly what I envisioned. A resilient, attention-grabbing, and cleverly designed mailbox that HOA Karen would never expect. I also considered timing. Installation had to be strategic. Ideally when HOA Karen was away so she wouldn't witness the process. I needed a window of opportunity when I could work uninterrupted, set everything in place, and enjoy the anticipation of her reaction. I imagined the suspense building as the new mailbox took shape. Each bolt tightened and each decorative element installed with care. The plan wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, calculated, and carefully executed to maximize both effectiveness and impact. Throughout this planning phase, I felt a sense of empowerment. The mailbox attacks had initially made me feel vulnerable, frustrated, and at the mercy of someone else's whims. But now I was taking control. Every detail of the plan reinforced the idea that I could influence the outcome, that I wasn't powerless in this situation. I began to feel a mix of excitement and satisfaction, knowing that soon, HOA Karen would encounter a mailbox she couldn't manipulate or intimidate. A mailbox that symbolized both clever problem-solving and a quiet form of triumph. I even entertained a few playful ideas, imagining subtle elements that would make the new mailbox uniquely memorable. Perhaps a flag that popped up in a surprising way, or an ornamental feature that would make it impossible to ignore. I wanted HOA Karen to realize that her usual tactics no longer applied, that the game had changed entirely. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about ingenuity, creativity, and turning a frustrating situation into an opportunity to assert control while maintaining humor and dignity. By the time I was ready to install the new mailbox, the planning had taken weeks. Every angle had been considered, every detail accounted for, and every potential issue anticipated. I felt a sense of anticipation mixed with confidence, knowing that this time, I had the upper hand. The repeated attacks and rising frustration had forced me to become strategic, creative, and patient, and all of that effort was about to pay off in a tangible and satisfying way. This was the moment when planning became action. I gathered the tools, prepared the materials, and mentally rehearsed the installation process. I imagined HOA Karen's reactions, the surprise, the subtle realization that her usual antics would no longer succeed. The mailbox, once a symbol of frustration and conflict, was about to transform into a symbol of clever problem-solving, resilience, and triumph over petty intimidation. The plan was ready. The pieces were in place, and the stage was set for a reveal that no one in the neighborhood, especially HOA Karen, would ever forget. The day had finally arrived. After weeks of planning, preparation, and anticipation, it was time to put my plan into action. I woke up early, feeling a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The mailbox that had caused so much frustration, anxiety, and countless repairs was about to be replaced with something entirely new, something HOA Karen would never expect. I could almost picture the look on her face, the way her expression would shift from smug satisfaction to shock and confusion when she saw the final result. It was a small victory, yes, but one that carried the weight of weeks of patience, strategy, and creativity. I double-checked all the materials, making sure that every bolt, bracket, and decorative element was in place and ready for installation. The reinforced post stood firmly in its position, stronger and sturdier than anything I had tried before. I had painted it in bright, eye-catching colors, a combination that was unusual for the neighborhood, yet tasteful enough not to seem out of place. The flag was customized with a clever little twist, a subtle nod to HOA Karen's repeated attempts to undermine me without being overtly confrontational. Everything had been meticulously designed to withstand not just accidental bumps, but deliberate attacks. And I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that I had outsmarted her before she even laid eyes on it. I began the installation carefully, making sure that the new post was perfectly aligned and secure. Each movement felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. I hammered the reinforced stakes into the ground, tightened the bolts with precision, and double-checked the leveling to ensure that nothing could tip it over. Every action was a reminder of the patience and effort that had gone into planning this moment. The old mailbox, battered and dented from weeks of harassment, was removed and placed aside. I took a moment to look at it, a symbol of the frustration I had endured, and silently acknowledged that it had served its purpose. It had led me to this creative solution and the opportunity for a small, satisfying triumph. Once the installation was complete, I stepped back to admire my work. The mailbox looked impressive, almost like a statement piece rather than just a functional post. Its design was unusual enough to catch the eye of anyone passing by. Yet it still blended well with the neighborhood's overall aesthetic. I felt a surge of pride, not just for the physical result but for the strategy, creativity, and careful planning that had made it possible. This wasn't just a mailbox, it was a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the subtle art of winning a battle without confrontation. Then came the moment of truth. I knew HOA Karen would be out at some point in the day, and I decided to wait for her approach to see the reaction firsthand. I positioned myself discreetly inside, watching through the window and waiting for her SUV to appear around the corner. My heart raced with anticipation. After weeks of being on edge every time I heard her engine, this time I was ready. This time, I had the upper hand. When her car finally appeared, I could feel a surge of adrenaline. She drove slowly, as usual, scanning the street, perhaps looking for opportunities to assert her dominance. But this time, as her eyes fell on the new mailbox, her expression shifted dramatically. Her eyebrows shot up, her mouth opened slightly in disbelief, and for a moment, she simply stared. I could almost hear the mental gears turning as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. The mailbox was not just intact, it was impossible to knock over. Visually striking, and cleverly designed in a way that left no room for her usual tactics. Her confusion quickly turned to frustration. She drove past slowly, then stopped, reversing slightly as if trying to figure out how she might approach it. She circled her car, casting glances at the mailbox from every angle. Muttering under her breaths, I could barely contain my laughter, knowing that she had no idea how to deal with this new obstacle. The countless hours of observation, planning, and careful installation had paid off. The mailbox was no longer just a target, it had become a silent statement. A clever reminder that her attempts to intimidate or control were no longer effective. Neighbors began to notice as well. Mr. Thompson came out of his house, chuckling softly as he caught sight of the mailbox, and a few kids on the street ran over to inspect it with curiosity and amusement. Even the other adults walking by couldn't help but comment on its unique design and sturdy construction. It was impossible to ignore. HOA Karen, who had thrived on attention and control, suddenly found herself in a position she hadn't anticipated. Overlooked, baffled, and entirely powerless against the very thing she had spent weeks trying to dominate. I watched her for a few minutes longer, enjoying the subtle psychological victory. She tried to find a weak spot, inspecting the base, tapping the post, and even giving it a tentative nudge. But it held firm. The mailbox did exactly what I had planned. It resisted her every attempt and made her realize, in no uncertain terms, that her usual methods were ineffective. It was a perfect blend of form and function, humor and practicality, and it served as a quiet but unmistakable message. After a while, she drove away, muttering something about strange taste and too flashy, which only made me laugh harder. The tension that had dominated my mornings and evenings for weeks began to lift. I felt a sense of relief, satisfaction, and even pride. The mailbox, once a source of endless frustration, had become a symbol of clever problem solving and resilience. It was proof that a little creativity, careful planning, and patience could turn even the most irritating situations into a triumph. In the days that followed, the mailbox remained intact. HOA Karen tried her usual drives past the property, but nothing happened. She couldn't knock it over, scratch it, or intimidate me. It stood firm, a constant reminder of the time, effort, and strategic thinking that had gone into its design. Neighbors continued to comment on it, some offering compliments on its durability and unique look, others chuckling at the story behind its installation. It had become a neighborhood attraction of sorts, a clever twist on what had started as a minor conflict. The grand reveal wasn't just about the physical mailbox, it was about reclaiming control, asserting boundaries, and doing so in a way that maintained dignity, humor, and intelligence. I had transformed a source of daily stress into a moment of victory, and the psychological satisfaction was immense. Every time I walked past it, I smiled, knowing that I had outsmarted HOA Karen without resorting to confrontation or hostility. It was a perfect balance of clever strategy and practical problem solving. By the time the excitement settled, I realized something important. The mailbox was more than just a functional object. It had become a symbol of patience, resilience, and creative thinking. The repeated frustration, the careful observation, and the meticulous planning had all led to this moment, the grand reveal. And in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had finally turned the tables, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond the neighborhood battle. The mailbox had won the war, and in doing so, it had given me both peace of mind and a story worth telling for years to come. After the grand reveal of the new mailbox, life in the neighborhood slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. But there was an undeniable change in the air. The tension that had defined the past several weeks was gone, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing I had finally asserted control over a situation that had long frustrated me. HOA Karen, who had thrived on small acts of intimidation and petty dominance, suddenly seemed powerless. The once dreaded sight of her SUV driving down the street no longer sent shivers of anxiety through me. I could step outside, retrieve my mail, and enjoy a peaceful moment on my porch without the constant worry of another attack. The mailbox, resilient and cleverly designed, had become both a physical and symbolic shield, protecting not only the letters and packages inside, but also my own sense of calm. HOA Karen's reaction in the days following the installation was fascinating to observe. At first, she seemed incredulous, driving past my house multiple times, inspecting the new mailbox from every angle. Her attempts to find a weak point, to regain some sense of control, were futile. She tapped it, leaned against it, and even tried to edge her car a little closer. But the mailbox stood firm, unyielding, and completely impervious to her usual tactics. I could almost see the mental gears turning in her head, trying to figure out what had changed. I imagined the realization slowly sinking in that this time, she could not manipulate or intimidate me. That sense of victory, silent and unspoken, was immensely satisfying. As the days turned into weeks, the mailbox continued to withstand not only HOA Karen's attention, but also the usual wear and tear of weather and neighborhood activity. Rain, wind, and even a few accidental bumps from delivery trucks failed to make a dent. Its durability was a constant reminder of the thought, planning, and effort that had gone into its design and installation. Every time I walked past it, I felt a surge of pride, not arrogance, but quiet pride in having faced a frustrating challenge and found a clever, practical solution. It was proof that patience, creativity, and careful planning could triumph over irritation, intimidation, and absurd neighborhood power struggles. Beyond the physical victory, there were lessons to be learned. The first and most obvious was the importance of observation. By taking the time to carefully watch HOA Karen's habits and understand her patterns, I was able to anticipate her actions and design a solution that worked. Observation allowed me to act strategically rather than react impulsively. I realized that many conflicts, whether in a neighborhood or in life, can be diffused or solved effectively if one takes the time to understand the underlying dynamics and behaviors at play. The second lesson was the value of creativity and thinking outside the box. Simply repairing the mailbox over and over again had proven ineffective. It was only when I allowed myself to consider unconventional solutions designing a mailbox that was both resilient and visually striking that I found a path to resolution. This experience reinforced the idea that problem-solving often requires stepping back, assessing the situation from multiple angles, and being willing to experiment with innovative approaches. The mailbox was a tangible representation of how creative thinking could overcome persistent challenges. Another important takeaway was patience. The months of frustration, repairs, and careful planning had tested my resolve. But those experiences were necessary to reach a successful outcome. It would have been easy to react impulsively perhaps by confronting HOA Karen directly, filing excessive complaints, or even resorting to less clever forms of retaliation. But patience allowed me to think strategically and achieve a solution that was both effective and dignified. In many ways, the prolonged nature of the conflict had sharpened my planning skills and taught me the value of thoughtful, deliberate action. The experience also highlighted the importance of maintaining humor and perspective. The situation, absurd as it was, became easier to bear once I allowed myself to see the humor in it. From the ridiculousness of repeated mailbox attacks to imagining HOA Karen's shocked expressions, laughter became a form of stress relief and empowerment. Humor allowed me to navigate the conflict without letting frustration dominate my emotions. It reminded me that even in tense situations, finding moments of levity can make challenges more manageable and even turn them into stories worth sharing. In addition, the neighborhood itself reacted in ways that reinforced the positive outcome. Neighbors who had previously been silent or cautious began to smile, comment, and even compliment the mailbox. Mr. Thompson, the retired veteran who had witnessed some of the attacks firsthand, stopped by to admire the craftsmanship and cleverness of the installation. The children continued to treat the mailbox as a minor spectacle, pointing out its unusual design and sturdy construction with excitement. This communal acknowledgement added to the sense of victory, showing that the resolution was not just personal but recognized and appreciated by those around me. Perhaps the most satisfying aspect, however, was the psychological shift. I no longer felt on edge whenever HOA Karen appeared. The mailbox had become a symbol of resilience and clever problem-solving, a physical manifestation of my ability to face and overcome challenges. It demonstrated that one could reclaim control, even in situations where someone else's behavior had previously caused anxiety and frustration. The balance of patience, observation, creativity, and humor had resulted in a solution that was both practical and empowering. Looking back, I also realized that this experience had taught me about boundaries and self-respect. HOA Karen's repeated attacks were a form of subtle intimidation, testing limits and attempting to assert dominance. By responding thoughtfully and strategically, I reinforced my own boundaries without escalating the conflict unnecessarily. It was a lesson in standing firm, asserting oneself, and finding constructive ways to deal with challenging personalities. The mailbox was more than a victory over a petty neighbor. It was a lesson in maintaining dignity while navigating difficult interactions. In the end, the story of the mailbox became a defining chapter in my experience in the neighborhood. It was a tale of minor conflict turned clever triumph, frustration transformed into strategy, and everyday objects elevated to symbols of resilience and ingenuity. The mailbox now stands as a reminder that challenges, no matter how trivial or absurd they may seem, can be opportunities for creative problem-solving, learning, and even a bit of satisfaction. HOA Karen eventually moved on, perhaps realizing that her usual tactics no longer worked, or perhaps simply deciding to focus her energy elsewhere. Regardless, the mailbox remained, intact and unyielding, a testament to the effectiveness of thoughtful planning and clever execution. Every time I retrieved the mail, I smiled, remembering the weeks of observation, preparation, and anticipation that had led to this moment of victory. The conflict had ended not with confrontation or hostility, but with creativity, resilience, and a subtle form of triumph that left everyone, including HOA Karen, no room to continue the petty battle. Ultimately, the experience reinforced timeless lessons: patience, observation, creativity, humor, and the importance of standing your ground. What had begun as repeated frustration with a simple mailbox evolved into a story of empowerment, a reminder that even the smallest challenges can be met with clever solutions and thoughtful planning. The mailbox, once a source of annoyance, had become a symbol of victory, and the lessons learned would stay with me far longer than the dents and scratches that had started it all. She kept running over my mailbox, so I installed one she definitely didn't see coming.